Years ago, Gladiator Beasts were Tier 1, and did it in rather dominating fashion. The traits that created this dominancy largely involved its summoning versatility to produce costless negatives against the opponent by destroying their field, and the ability to protect these gains, while also locking down future play options by the opponent through the use of cards like Solemn Judgment, Cold Wave, and War Chariot. Not surprisingly, the ban list came along and wrecked Gladiator Beasts. For Tier 1 decks all received the ban list treatment somewhere down the line, most notably with the entrapment of Bestiari. When Bestiari was fully released from the ban list in 2015, some individuals felt that Gladiator Beasts at full power would simply rise up again and once again be a force in the meta. That clearly has not happened. Why not? The chief problem Gladiator Beasts face in the modern meta is a shift in how the game is played. In their heyday, resource acquisition was not easy, as players typically had to work for their pluses and their field presence. In contrast, now so many decks are able to acquire pluses that the costless negatives that Gladiator Beasts can inflict upon their opponent are much less influential in neutralizing their play strategy. Unfortunately, this negative producing strategy is the chief element of Gladiator Beasts, for they have little ability to produce their own pluses. So, facing this new reality, what can Gladiator Beasts do to compete? Due to time constraints, I'll forego discussing the level 5 or higher Gladiator Beast monsters because none of them are good enough to warrant being discussed, and really they're not good enough to warrant play. Lanista is a fine card, but unfortunately it runs into the problem of a better card existing that basically does the same thing it does, only better. Also, the banishment associated with its effect is somewhat questionable because it removes that Gladiator Beast from circulation, which can hurt future play potential. I never really understood the purpose of Tigarius, for no Gladiator Beast can be innately special summoned. Test Tiger is not a Gladiator Beast, which limits the usefulness of its searching ability. The discard is annoying, despite Equeste being able to recover the card, or Darius being able to special summon any of the discarded Gladiator Beasts. Finally, Proving Ground does the same thing without the cost. In a slower game, maybe this card would have been better, but it's rather bad then, and it is incredibly bad now. Laquari has lost a lot of its beatstick dominance over the year, especially with the introduction of XZ monsters, but due to its essential role as fusion material for Heraklinos, it is almost mandatory to run at least 2 copies, which is what I do. 2 copies. Don't get me wrong, Laquari can still be useful, but being nothing but a 2100 attack point monster is somewhat lacking in today's game. I don't think Darius receives enough credit, for its special summoning ability is essential to maximizing the big play capacity of this deck, especially in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! The drawback of summoning being removed when Darius is removed is almost somewhat meaningless, because when Darius is used, 99% of the time, you're probably going to be special summoning something from your extra deck, using Darius in the summoned monster. I run 2 copies. I always wanted to like Demakari, but it's just not good enough, as it rarely helps break a stalemate or set up a comeback. Basically, it's just a frontrunner card, and that's really not helpful to Gladiator Beast, especially in this era. When things are rolling for Gladiator Beast, they don't need anything to help them get rolling even more. Equeste is another essential card in this deck, largely due to the ability to recover War Chariot from the graveyard to produce a form of continuous monster effect negation, which can heavily limit your opponent's options. Also, the ability to add a Bestiari or a Laquari to set up a fusion summons in main phase 2 is also a viable option. 2 copies. Not much needs to be said about Bestiari. It is the key card for the entire deck, as it can create its own negatives for the opponent, especially against pendulum decks, as well as being the key fusion material for Gyzarus. However, despite its importance, I only run 2 copies because drawing into Bestiari is typically not a good thing, especially early, due to its somewhat low attack power. If only Bottomless increased its defense to 2500 instead of 2400. Unfortunately, it just doesn't. Realistically, though, this complaint is secondary because the real problem with Bottomless is it's just too defensive, and in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, speed and aggressiveness is what wins unless you're running a deck specifically designed to be a counter deck, and in my opinion and experience, Gladiator Beasts cannot afford to be that type of deck and expect to be successful. Secutor is another important combo piece. When you can pull it off, it doesn't return itself to the deck, so you can take advantage of its effect once per turn as long as the conditions are met. Clearly, though, with only 400 attack, it will need help, either cards that put opponents' monsters into defense mode or prevent it from being destroyed as a result of battle, which can definitely be addressed and should be addressed in this deck. I think one copy is appropriate. Salmonite is another card I wanted to like over the years due to its Gladiator card searching ability. War Chariot, anyone? But having to destroy a monster by battle and send it to the graveyard basically scorches its playability, especially now in this pendulum era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, Torax is one of those cards that probably has been power creeped in a way because it was fine when it was originally introduced, but now losing a monster simply to draw a card is just not something that Gladiator Beasts can really afford to do and expect to win consistently. Bestiari is definitely side deck worthy. It used to be main deck before Pendulums came along, but now it's only side deck worthy because of the Pendulum Renaissance. Murmillo is a Gladiator Beast that has fallen on hard times because of all of the cannot target monsters running around. However, I like running one copy because for its versatility, as a majority of the time, there will be monsters on your opponent's field that do not evade its ability, that you can pop, and getting that +1 pop is always nice. I'm not a fan of Test Tiger or Test 8 because for Tiger, I think you're just typically giving up too much. You're giving up two cards, the Tiger and the Gladiator Beast monster that you're returning, for just too little. One card with questionable advantage for the negative elements that it would bring to the opponent or have become limited in their usefulness, especially when you're only bringing out one. Ape is just pointless because it doesn't trigger Gladiator Beast effects. So in a modern meta where Gladiator Beast can no longer be the raw power bully deck, Ape, is, my opinion, has lost any real purpose. For the fusion monsters, I run one copy of Heraklinos, which is still amazing, especially in an environment where both Cold Wave and Solemn Judgment are no longer available, and the discard can frequently be reacquired to the hand by Equeste. Norakurus is not bad, but the 3-monster requirement for a 2800 Armades is just too situational for my tastes. This type of deck I run demands some, let's just say, extra deck creativity, so just tossing one in actually does hurt the deck. Finally, I run 2 copies of Gyzarus, which is the negative machine that constantly produces those multiple negatives for the opponent. Some may argue that Gyzarus has lost some of its juice due to the non-targeting monsters, and that's true, but the rise of Pendulums has increased its value as a means to eliminate the total scale, boom boom, upon its summons. I don't run Gyzarus because I don't run Spartacus, and Bestiari is just needless. Due to time constraints and abridged analysis of the direct spell and trap support, outside of War Chariot, it's all meaningless. Okay, a less abridged version. The large problem with most of the Gladiator Beast direct support is that the cards are no longer useful in the given meta, at least in my opinion, or there are just better options from more generic cards. For example, I don't like Proving Ground because while searching and deck thinning is almost always good, for Gladiator Beasts there is little real advantage to normal summoning one of them outside of Laquari or Bestiari to set up your fusion during main phase 1, and running Proving Ground only for this purpose, it's just not effective enough for my taste. If Gladiator Beasts ever got a new monster that had some innate special summoning ability, Proving Ground's usefulness would then shoot back through the roof for me. Respite is too inconsistent for my taste, too frequently being a dead card despite Equeste's effect, for Equeste should be focusing on getting War Chariot for its reuse, not getting fuel for Respite. Battle Manica once was a nice card. I actually preferred it much more than I think a lot of other people did, but it's been replaced by a superior equip, which really should be that equip should be known by most people. Should be saying, oh yeah, that has replaced. I prefer Waboku over Defense Tactics because Tactics is returned to the deck instead of sent to the graveyard, and Waboku or Tactics is not good always. Closing out the support, I run 3 copies of War Chariot, which is standard and should be expected in all Gladiator Beast decks. The ability to negate a monster effect without cost is incredibly useful, especially in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where a vast majority of play advantage is produced via monster effects. Overall, while this may sound harsh, In my opinion, anyone that proposes running a Gladiator Beast deck without at least 2 copies of War Chariot is proposing an innately inferior deck. Period. It's just inferior to what it could be if you don't include War Chariot. Maybe you could have successfully kind of created an argument for a lack of War Chariot when Gladiator Beast first came out, due to, oh yeah, monster effects, not really that big of a deal, spell and trap cards run the meta. Now, no way. Monster effects run the meta. So if you're basically saying, oh, that costless monster effect negation, yeah, whatever, yeah, I don't know what you're thinking. The rest of the support is not even worth mentioning, in my opinion, as I said above. For the non-Gladiator Beast monsters, the most important factor is producing an environment where the Gladiator Beasts can produce their effects, thus speed and removal of obstacles. For the remaining monsters, I run 1 Thunder King Rai-Oh. Without Proving Ground, I only run 1 card that can search, and its activation is not universally critical. So Thunder King only negatively affects the opponent. Also, its special summons negation effect can make it difficult for your opponent. Recall that I don't run Lannistia because I believe there was a better card. Most of you probably already know what this card is. It's Elemental Hero Prisma. Prisma is superior for 2 major reasons. First, it only sends the monster it copies to the graveyard instead of banishing it. Second, it can be special summoned from the deck via a Hero Live, significantly increasing the fusion probability rate for this deck. I prefer 2 copies because of the usefulness of a Hero Live. I'm not really a big fan of drawing Prisma into my hand, especially during the opening draw, but it's tough for me to really chastise somebody running it at 3. I also like running 1 copy of Heroic Challenger Thousand Blade as a small OTK stopgap, and a card that can be pulled out of the graveyard at the end of your opponent's battle phase if they've done damage to set up a future XZ play. I also run 1 copy of Neo-Spacian Grand Mole to bounce back those annoying monsters like Dark Destroyer. The final monster I run is probably the most, questionable or controversial. I like running 1 copy of Ghost Charon the Underworld Boatman. For those unfamiliar with Charon's effect, the gist of it is basically when Charon's the only monster on your field and your opponent has at least 1 monster, you can banish Charon and a fusion monster in your graveyard to special summon a dragon synchro monster with a level equal to the banished monsters. Due to the fusion monsters that are naturally run in this deck, Charon can really be a nice ace in the hole card, producing the ability to summon a monster like Shooting Star Dragon or Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, or even something simple like Red Wyvern, which it can do via its effect, or just as a natural tuner. Sure, there are times when it's not useful, but in my experience, the positives have outweighed the negative. For the remaining spells, I run my 2 spell staples, 1 Raigeki, 1 Soul Charge. I run the 1 Reinforcement of the Army to increase versatility of Prisma, Acquisition, or grab Thousand Blade when I can discard him easily into the graveyard. Obviously, I run 3 copies of a Hero Lives to maximize the speed of summoning Prisma. The life point cost is not a huge deal due to the additional speed I think Gladiator Beasts need to compete, and it can be turned into a small plus with another card in this deck. I run 2 copies of Instant Fusion for access to Norden to increase the probability of both XZ and Fusion plays, as Gladiator Beasts can be destroyed or sent to the graveyard via Twin Twister or Prisma. That said, I do run 3 copies of Twin Twister to deal with annoying back row, especially the Solemn and Mirror Force family of cards, in addition to augmenting Gyzarus. Finally, the card that replaced Battle Manica is obviously Moon Mirror Shield, which is an amazing card in this deck, especially when combined with Secutor, which can sit continuous on the field, gaining you multiple plus. Finally, for the traps, I run 2 Anti-Pendulum staples in 1 copy of Bottomless Trap Hole and 1 Solemn Warning, and the 1 Quasi-Staple in Vanity's Emptiness. Also, the obvious 3 copies of Waboku to maximize Gladiator Beast's effect activation probability. And finally, with all of the life points and costs associated with this deck, I like running 2 copies of Ferret Flames, which is non-target, non-destruction, return to the deck mass monster removal that can typically utterly wreck your opponent's field and leave it wide open for your monsters. For the remaining extra deck, the general feel is kind of just generic rank 4s along with those synchros, so 2 Elder Entity Nordens, 1 Shooting Star Dragon, 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 1 Red Wyvern, 1 Castel, 1 Number 101, 1 XZ Dragon, 1 Lightning Chidori, 1 Gaga Samurai, 1 Gaga Cowboy, and 1 Number 39 Utopia. Overall, Gladiator Beasts are in a tough place in the modern meta. because you have to acknowledge that Gladiator Beast decks are significantly slower than most decks. Also, the loss of the importance of negatives hurts this deck as well, because a number of decks can just turn 0 cards on the field into 5 cards in the field with relative ease. However, take heart, for Gladiator Beast still can compete in the modern meta when their decks are designed appropriately, due to their inherent versatility. Well, that's my Gladiator Beast deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.